Hello and welcome. My name is Leah Kopke. I'm a 3D motion design freelancer, and this is my podcast, Ambient 3D Animations. This episode is going to be a little bit of a choose your own adventure moment because there are, in fact, a few different things I'd like to show. And in this episode, I'm going to show how to take our textures that we had created inside a Substance Painter and how to set up a material with them inside of Redshift. I will have another episode where I'm showing how to do the same thing, but for Unreal Engine. In the past couple of episodes, we painted a cheesecake in Substance 3D Painter. We went through all the export settings so that you can export into any render of your choosing. And now we're going to break down actually setting up the nodes in some of these materials within the renders. So let's go ahead and jump into Cinema 4D and Redshift to go over how we set up our nodes. I really appreciate all the likes and subscribes. That really helps me continue doing this. So here we are inside of Cinema 4D. If I go into our render settings, you can see that I currently have Redshift as my renderer. Very important to make sure you have that. And then I'm going to need to create a couple materials. So I'm going to open up the material manager. And we're actually going to create two different materials. We're going to create an open PBR material because we went over how to export the physical based render material here. And that's pretty universal, so it works in most renders. And then we'll also just do a regular standard Redshift material. So now we have both of these in here. We're going to need our FBX of our pumpkin spice cheesecake. So whatever project you're working in, you just need to open up your FBX. So I'll say actually merge, and I'll need to merge the FBX we had created in that initial video. These look fine. So now it's loading. I'm going to delete this baked material because we're going to build a new material. And you can see here that my cheesecake is rather small. No worries there. And what we'll need to do is build our textures. So let's start with the PBR material. So if I double click on that, you'll see that we get the node editor open. And nodes can seem really intimidating, but they don't need to be intimidating. You can do this. Anyone can do it with a little bit of practice. So I have my folder open. I'm going to go into where we had exported our textures initially. I'm going to open up the PBR. And I'm just going to put this over here. So now you can kind of see my textures here, as well as my Cinema 4D. There we go. So you'll notice that I did export out more than what we needed. We don't really need the height map, but you could, if you did build out a height map, you can use that. I'm going to be using the normal map, and we did talk about exporting out two different kinds of normal maps. The kind of normal map that Redshift uses is OpenGL and not DirectX, so we'll actually want this normal map today. We'll also want our base color. We'll want, we don't really need a mission, but you could add that in here if you do have any emissive material. We need our metallic and our roughness. And by the way, I'll also show you where you can find a list of additional ports in case if you do have additional materials that you would like to set up. So I'm going to drag and drop these into my node editor. I'm just going to hit no. It says this image is not in your project search path. Do you want to create a copy at the project location? No, 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 no. I don't need to do that. And I'm going to rearrange these a little bit. So this is our base color. So our base color port, I'm going to drag and drop into the color. And if you'd like to kind of preview how this is looking, we can actually add this to our model. So I'll just drag and drop this on all of these. And now you can see that the color is added, and you'll notice that it looks kind of low res, but don't worry about that. That's just because in our preferences, that's because under our viewport hardware here, you'll see our default resolution is pretty low. I think it's usually good to keep this low, especially if you have a complex scene, just because I've run into problems where it just crashes. Like it won't even import a model if it has really nice textures, like 8K textures, and you bump this all the way up. So it's okay that it's low, but just have peace of mind that that's what's controlling that, is that you have a lower default resolution shown in here. But if you ever hit render, it will look higher resolution. And I need to add a light in here, so I'll just add in a skylight for right now and reduce it. But you can see, like, this does in fact have more detail. It's just not showing up in the viewport, but it is there, so no worries. Everything's okay and working correctly. Now let's go ahead and add in the rest of the nodes here. So in here, that's our color. We're going to need to add in our metalness next, so that's this texture. We don't have any metalness on this. We can add in the normal, and for that I'm going to need to hit this plus button here and look for a bump. So then when you plug this in here, it'll all work. And you'll find the additional options in here. So if you wanted to add in something like we were talking about emission, you could plug into any one of these here. You'll notice under geometry, that's where we can find the bump map. You can also find opacity and such in there. You'll see base properties, emission. You can choose the color and the luminance. So there's all of those great options there. For right now, we want to use the base properties, geometry, bump map. So we're actually going to plug that in there. And if I hit start IPR to get a preview, you'll notice that the height scale in here is a little bit too intense. So I usually like to take this back a little bit to the point where it looks a little bit more normal to me. Oh, I wasn't even meaning to make a normal map joke there. But you can take back that until your normal map looks a little bit more normal. Yeah, so you can try things out. That looks pretty good, because you can see a little bit of that bump map, but it isn't too much. And then we also have this texture too, which is the roughness. So I'm going to put this up here. I'm going to organize these a little bit more in a moment. So we have our color, we have our metalness. I like to have these go in order so that things are nice and neat and organized. So that's our color setup, and you can see we do have a cheesecake, and it did come in correctly, and it is rendering. So if you wanted to change the color space, you could in here. Auto is pretty good, and it usually guesses it accurately. So if you do have a displacement map for your PBR texture, now I didn't really create a displacement map inside of Substance 3D Painter, so you won't really see anything coming up here, but I'm going to drag and drop this in here as an example, just so that you know how to set up the displacement map, since that's a little bit of a different process here. So here is our displacement. We can hit the plus button over here and we'll look up displacement. So we'll drag and drop our displacement in here. You can take your output and put it in your displacement. This one's a little different. It goes into the output. And then of course we're going to connect the texture to the texture map. So that is the setup for this. And if the height doesn't come in right, you can always adjust the scale here to something that looks right to you. Another thing that I would like to point out is that for this normal map that's plugged into the bump map, so the bump map node inside of Redshift is really nice because it can detect if you're using a grayscale bump map or a normal map that is RGB value, so red, green, and blue. So the bump map holds less value because it's only grayscale, and the RGB values tend to make a more realistic bumpy texture just because it has more data to work with to tell Cinema 4D how to simulate that bump. So that's good to keep in mind. And just to break down some of these, your color map is your color data. Your metallic tells you how metallic the texture is. Like you can see my texture is black because cheesecakes aren't metallic, they aren't a metal. But if we had a metallic object, like a pair of scissors or something like that that we were texturing, you would see this texture as being grayscale, and it uses those values to tell this. And you can see black is the absence of metalness, white would be this is super metallic, and it'll give that metallic reflectivity that you'll see on aluminum, silver, and so on and so forth. Roughness is how rough the texture is. Is it shiny and bright with hard highlights, or does it have those kind of diffused highlights where it doesn't look as shiny with that gradient? So I hope this helps you while you're working. But there you go. That is how you would set this up initially. And then we could also go through the same process for the Redshift standard. So I'll just go ahead and replace the other texture with this one here so that as we're building it, you can kind of see it build on. I have currently my folder open for Redshift with the Substance Painter textures we had created in the last episode. You'll see we have color, height field. I'll show you where to put the height field, even though I don't think we need it today. We also have emission. I'll show you where the emission goes. Again, even though I don't really think I need that for a cheesecake. Metalness is how metallic your texture is. Again, cheesecake isn't metal, but I'll still show you where that goes. We have our normal map and our roughness. So roughness is how reflective that surface is. Is it a shiny plastic or is it kind of a rough plastic? So you can really think about that and compare them. So we're going to go through all of this, and the first step is we really need to copy and paste these in here. So let's go ahead and drag and drop these in here. It's going to say this image is not in the project path. Do you want to? And we're going to say no, because I don't need to unless if you'd like to. I just don't like making copies of files because I know where they are, and that's all that really matters. So here is our cheesecake color. So we can go ahead and drag and drop this into our color node because this is where the base color goes. And although it doesn't look high resolution, again, if we just hit Start IPR, we're going to see that it isn't too bad and that we actually do have more detail in here. That's just because our viewport settings are lower in resolution to save ourselves some memory. It helps prevent your computer from crashing to do so. Now let's see what this one is. This one is emission color. So we don't really need an emissive color, but I'm just going to drag and drop this over here so you can see where to find it. under base properties emission, if you had color, you could drag and drop this into the color. So we could select that here and you'll see that it makes a new port here for emission color. Now we don't actually need that, so I'm going to delete that, but I want to show you where that is in case if you do need it. This is our metalness. Again, our cheesecake isn't really metal, so this texture is fully black. Usually it would be a grayscale texture if there was actually some metalness in here, but you'll see that the metalness node is already here. So we can drag and drop that here into our Redshift standard material. And you can also move around in here by clicking and holding the middle mouse button and then just dragging your mouse around. That's usually what I do. And here you'll see that we have our height field. So you'll notice that the displacement goes to a different area. It actually goes where it says displacement in here, which is your output node. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a new displacement. And you'll see we have a displacement node here. Drag and drop that out there where we need it. And you can drag this port into this port, drag this port into our displacement port. And now mine doesn't have any displacement. I didn't build that texture into the Substance Painter since I'm using a normal map. But now if you do have a displacement map, you know how to do that. I'm going to delete it. Next we have our roughness. You'll see your roughness is listed here. Drag and drop for those ports. We have our normal. Now this is our last one. Zooming out to double check I'm not missing anything. You can really make as many textures as you want. I'll go ahead and click this plus button here. Search for bump. The cool thing about the bump map here inside of Cinema 4D is that it can detect if you're using a bump map or a normal map. Now the normal map actually holds more data than a black and white bump map, even though they both create bumpy textures, because the normal map uses RGB values, so red, green, and blue. So that's super duper helpful for adding more data to your textures. So I'm going to drag and drop this in here. We got our bump map going. And let's go ahead and hit Start IPR. So you'll notice that our normal map is pretty intense. I mean, you can really see that texture in there. If you would like it to be a little bit more subtle, we can adjust that. So you have your height scale in here. Let's try something like 0.3. And that looks much nicer to me, looks much more realistic. But you could also drag this button here to adjust it to something that feels right to you. Even 0.1 feels like it might be enough to get the job done. So there's our lovely little cheesecake. And you know, you can get creative with lighting in here. You can drop in an area light. You can adjust the size of the area light. I'll turn off the IPR here for a moment. So you can see that the area light is this big rectangle here. And it's rather big. I'm going to scale that in a little bit. You can kind of preview it in here. So there's area lights in addition to others, and you can kind of preview it even in the IPR because you can see where your axis is, which is helpful. You can adjust the intensity and such. Now I'm not going to spend a long time on lighting because I feel like the purpose of this episode is more so showing you how to set up the textures. So if you want to go all out and make something even more beautiful, you can. You can set up multiple lights and so on. That's how to set up your Redshift materials after you create them in Substance 3D Painter. If you're interested in learning Unreal Engine, you can check out the other episode for that as well. And if you found this helpful, I really always appreciate it if you hit the like button or hit subscribe. That's a huge help to my channel, and I appreciate you so much. I hope to see you here on the next episode of Ambient 3D Animations.